So the first thing you're going to want to do is to set up your project the right way. And before you do that though, a lot of things happen outside of Premiere before you set up your project that I want you to be aware of. And this will really help you understand how to help your system run a little bit smoother before you get into editing. And it will make a little bit of a difference because some of these are just tips or even tricks that I want to share with you to help your editing experience go a lot smoother. And the first thing I want to talk to you about is RAM. I'm going to suggest that you have a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM in your edit system. Most RAM these days is very inexpensive. It's not too hard to swap RAM out. You don't have to. You could have 8, but I wouldn't go any lower than that. 16 is really where you'll start to see the performance increase. If you're going to be editing HD footage, and even 4K footage, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. The other item that I want to talk to you about is the video card that's inside of the computer. Now, I'm working with a laptop here for these lessons, and some of you may be on a laptop, some of you might be in a tower computer, and some of you might be in one of those all-in-one computers like the iMacs that are out there, and those are all good. But if you're working with a laptop, you may not, of course, be able to do much about the video card or in one of those all-in-ones. But the idea, though, would be if you could get a computer that already has a video card, high-performance video card that has at least 2 gigs of RAM on that card. That's kind of hard to find these days, but it will make a difference. So 2 gigs of video RAM on the video card within your edit system. If you have a tower computer, you can switch those cards out, no problem. You can get 4 gigs of RAM or even more these days, and man, that will really make a difference in your editing experience. That alone will really help. The other item that I want to talk to you about is utilizing a separate drive other than the system drive that's within the computer. So the system drive, I know you may already know this, some of you may not. The system drive is where you do not want to store your media that you've captured from one of your cameras. As a matter of fact, the system drive is really meant to run the computer, right? The operating system, the OS. It'll run Premiere. It'll run Word, PowerPoint, and all that. You want to allow the system to focus on the application software and not try to manage the media that comes, the high data rate media that comes from these cameras, because if it tries to operate both, it really does begin to struggle at some point, especially if you have a long project. So my suggestion to you is that you consider utilizing a separate drive. In fact, all professional editors do this. Utilize a separate drive for the media that comes from your cameras. And I'm going to take it a step further. I happen to have a separate external drive right here. And of course, when you plug this in, it'll show up on your desktop, but I'm running with a USB separate drive that spins at 7,200 RPM. And you can read that spec on the box itself before you buy it. If you're out and about or online, you can read the specifications and try to make sure that it's spinning at 7,200 RPM. It'll say it on there, which makes it more of a higher performance spinning drive. And they're relatively inexpensive anyway. The other option that I'm going to strongly suggest, and really where the industry is going anyway, is to utilize a solid state drive. Now, there are many benefits to utilizing this solid state drive. There's no heat, there's no sound. They're much, much faster than these spinning drives. They are coming down in price, but this alone, just this alone, will increase the overall performance of your edit system, especially if you're going to be utilizing and editing 4K video. And I know some of you may not be even doing anything with 4K yet, but it's right around the corner. And you'll want to be utilizing a solid state drive. Now, you can get these external, like this one here. This is made by Samsung. This happens to have a USB 3 connection, and I'll connect it to a USB 3 port on my laptop. And like I said, this by itself makes such a big difference. Great investment. Now, you can get these internal too. The price is a little bit less if you go with an internal. Of course, you want to get an internal if you have, one of those tower computers. You don't want to get an internal for a laptop or an all-in-one. I don't believe in most all-in-ones you can switch it out. You might be able to, maybe when you order it. I know you can custom order all-in-ones and get an SSD installed or already in it, and you can custom order a laptop with it as well. But I'm noticing that SSD drives are becoming more popular already natively installed in the computer before you even buy it. So if you don't have an SSD drive, this is a great way to go. If you want to continue to use The traditional spinning drive, I strongly should suggest that you get one that spins at 7,200 RPM minimum. And again, it'll say it on the box when you take a look at the specs. Okay, well, with any one of those or all of those suggestions, if you could do all of those, your editing experience will go very smooth. And if you're going to be editing 4K footage, you may want to consider getting an external 4K display as well, so you can really see the difference that makes. And of course, your client will be able to see it too natively on a 4K display. Okay, with that said, let's move on. I happen to have these cameras here because I want to talk to you a little bit about the different types of media that you might be working with. Many of you are utilizing, DSLR to get 2K footage, right? HD 1920 by 1080, which is close to 2K, or 4K footage, and that's great. Some of you are just getting some high-res photos from your DSLRs, like from Canon, Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, which is fine, but you're mixing all those together, and which is fine in Premiere, and I'll show you how to do that in a different lesson. But the reason why I bring up these cameras is not to boast about the high quality that these are capable of doing, although it does look great. But what's happening, what I'm noticing, is a lot of new editors are editing directly from the card, and I'm going to strongly suggest that you don't do that. The first thing you want to do before you do anything in Premiere is you want to back this card up to your separate drive, whether it's an external or a separate drive internal. Remember, on a tower, you can just pop in drives, no problem. But you want to back this up to that drive. And I'm going to take it a step further. You'll want to create a project folder. For every new project, you'll want to create a project folder with a separate folder for every card that you want to edit from. So whether you're using a traditional spinning drive or a solid state drive, on this drive, you'll want to copy this footage or media onto this drive in the project folder. In fact, I'm going to call that the global project folder, where all cards will get backed up first into that folder. As a matter of fact, all your music should go in that folder. All of your images and graphics and titles and animations or whatever you get should go into that folder first. Then you edit from this, not from the solid state or the compact flash or the S/S or the P2 cards that you might be using. So it's kind of a no-brainer, I know, for a lot of you, but I have seen this in my classes, and I've seen people do that. It's not a good idea. In fact, I will take it another step further and say that what I do is I'll put all of my cards in a Ziploc baggie. I'll seal it. Of course, there's a note in there that talks about, or it's all written as to what each card has. And I will not use these cards until I've done one of two things. I've reviewed all the footage to make sure it's all been transferred correctly, or the project is done and signed off and delivered. I will not use these cards sometimes, depending on the importance. They're all important, but depending on the ultra important projects, I may not use these cards until the project's delivered and signed off on. So these are inexpensive now. They don't cost a whole lot of money, and it's definitely a good peace of mind to be able to rest at night knowing that I have a backup, even after I've backed up. I have a backup of a backup on the actual media card, so that I feel better as I'm going through the editing process for my client. Okay, so with that said, let's jump right into this. Now, after I take the card out of the camera, right? Let's pretend you're walking into your edit bay, or you're opening up your laptop or your computer, turning it on for the first time. You take the card out, or cards out of your cameras. And in my case, I happen to have an SD card reader in this MacBook Pro. So I'm going to take this card, I'm going to pop it in, and if you don't have a card reader built in to your laptop, you'll need to go get one of those inexpensive card readers. You can find those anywhere. But once you've connected everything correctly, you should see that card. Your computer should be communicating with that card. And in my case, it shows up here on the desktop. So there's the card, and below it is my project drive. In my case, it's this drive right here. Now, in that project drive, I'm going to double click on it to open. I'm going to create another folder just for this project. So I'll navigate up to this option here, click on that, and I'll select new folder. It's done a little differently on a PC, but you get the idea. You want to create a new folder for every project. And so I'm going to keep this simple. I went down to the lake earlier, so we're going to call this Lake Project 01. And there we go. There it is. That's it. That's going to be now my global overall folder where everything lives in under one roof, basically. So I'll eventually have many, many, many subfolders, and each folder will represent every card from every camera, It'll represent just music, just graphics, or just photos. But the important thing though, and I can't stress this enough, is the following. So you can see here on my desktop, there's the card that I pulled from my Panasonic camera. And I want to open this up so I can see the content. So in my case, I'll double click on it. It opens up. I want to take everything from that card and copy it into a separate subfolder. So I'll go back over here. I'm going to create another folder within my project folder, and I'm going to call this Panasonic Panasonic Card 1. I might have several cards from this camera. So I'm going to call that Panasonic Card 1. I'll go back over here to the card. I'll drag this over. And now, while this is happening, of course, I'm really doing a service to myself, or I'm really creating a good workflow for all the media that's going to be coming into this project. I might have a dozen cards. And the more organized you are as an editor, at this point, the easier your editing process will go. It'll just make a lot of sense, and one day you'll thank me just for that tip alone, if not all the other tips you're going to learn throughout this training series. So that's successfully copied over. There we go. And now I can eject this card, and once I verified by looking at all the media in Premiere, once I verify that it transferred over correctly, I'll feel a little bit better about reusing this card. In some cases, like I said, I'll put this in a Ziploc baggie with all the other cards from that project, and I'll wait before I use it until after the project's been delivered and signed off on. So there we go. There's one subfolder within the, I'll call it the global project folder. And like I said, there are many times I have 20 subfolders for all the different cards and all the different media that I'm going to edit within Premiere. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to navigate down to the dock at the bottom of my screen here. There it is. And I'm going to click on the Premiere Pro icon. You can get to this icon in the Applications folder within your computer, but however you get to the icon to launch Premiere, go to it now, double click on it, and launch Premiere Pro. And I'm running the latest version. This is 2015 right now. This is when I'm recording these lessons, and I happen to be running the absolute latest version of Premiere Pro CC for this particular lesson. And you'll see here Premiere Pro. I know it says Premiere Pro CC 2014. There have been a couple of updates. I am running those updates. Okay, so once this window opens, you'll see that you have several options. You can sync settings, you can open up a previous project, or you can create a new project. So navigate over to Create New Project, click on that, and you'll want to give your project a name. So I'm going to call this Lake Project. And some of you may want to add a number, you may want to add a date, whatever makes the most sense to you. Now, after you've given your project a name, you'll want to go to the location option. Navigate over here to the browse, click on that, and make sure that you select your project drive within the project folder, and then select choose or OK. That way, this project now is saved in this external drive. Now, below that, there are a couple of tabs here I want to quickly talk about. This general tab under video rendering and playback, you can click on this. You may have two options. You may have software engine or GPU acceleration. Both of these are good. If you happen to have GPU acceleration, click on it. If you don't have GPU, don't worry about it. Software only runs beautifully. It's just for whatever reason, Adobe hasn't gotten around to approving whatever hardware may be in your computer, and they may never get around to it. There are so many computers out there that they simply may not have the time to get to. But if you happen to have two, both work great, but if you happen to have GPU, go with that. Now, navigate over to the Scratch Disks tab, click on that, and make sure every one of these options, make sure the path is going to the proper location. So to double check that, you select the Browse button here to the right of each one of these, and you navigate to your external or internal separate drive, right, from the system drive, and you want to click on that, click on the folder, and then select Choose. Now, of course, you can see the path of every one of these. You can quickly browse through these and make sure that they are going to the right location. If they're not, click on the Browse button to the right and make sure and click and point it to the right location. Once you've done that, you can select OK. And then Premiere Pro will open. Now, before we go any further, just for this lesson, I'd like you to navigate up to the word Window here at the top, mouse click on that, select Workspace, and then select Editing CS 5.5. Click on that because I'd like you to be in the same workspace. As a matter of fact, this is the workspace I use for all the lessons anyway. So, and I do talk about what all these windows do in different lessons, so we will definitely go over all of that. But what I'd like you to do is navigate over here to the bottom left-hand corner and look for the media browser. Look for the media browser and then navigate down to, you'll see local drives. If that's not open, click on that to open it and you'll see all of your hard drives that are internal or external. And in my case, I'm going to go to my project drive, right? I'll click on the triangle to the left of that. Let me close this for just a moment. And then you'll see all the different folders. You want to look for your project folder. There it is. That's the one I want to use. I'll open that up by clicking on the triangle to the left. There's the project that I just created. And here is the card that I just copied from the SD card not too long ago. I'll click on this triangle to open it. And this is generally kind of experimental because some formats on different cards will get you to the media differently. So you might have to experiment with it. And you'll get used to how that works with the different formats that you might have in your camera, because some of these folders might be a little bit different depending on the format or the codec that you're recording to. But you might just have to click on some of these subfolders to get into the actual media. And in my case, I didn't have to drill down too far, but you might have to do some checking around to get to it. And you'll see the media over here to the right that's within this folder that allows you to work with that in Premiere Pro. So in my case, I've got these thumbnails. If you don't see these thumbnails, in other words, if they're really small or you don't see them at all, you can mouse click and separate these areas within the workspace accordingly, and you can drag it over to the right. I do talk about how to do this in a different lesson, by the way. And once you drag these over, like I just did, you'll be able to see the different thumbnails, and those are photos. And in my case, I have both photos and videos. And if I hover over any one of these video clips, I'm not clicking, I'm just hovering, I can preview and look at all the media. So that's for video. If it's just a photo, I don't need to do anything. I can just look at the photo and verify that that's all there. That's one way to do this. Or you can import this entire folder. By looking at any one of these, I haven't imported anything. So to import a folder, control-click on that and select Import. When you do that, Premiere Pro will then officially import that entire folder, and this now becomes a bin, by the way, once it's in Premiere. And you can click on this triangle to the left so that it points down, and you'll see all the different media that you have that you've imported. And you can tell that these are stills by the extension .jpeg, and you can tell that these are videos by the extension .mp4. And if I double click on any one of these, that photo will then appear in this window called the source window, just like that. And I can verify by looking at that item if it transferred over correctly. And of course, you can do the same for video. Double click on the video, and you can mouse click on this playhead here and drag it and scrub through the video. And you can do that for every one of these items that you've imported into your project. And the nice thing about importing each folder is that Premiere leaves it in the folder, and you can change the name. I would suggest you do that. You can change the name of each one of these folders by gently clicking on the text and typing anything you want in there. You may want to type in the name that pertains best to that media, because you're going to have several folders, like I said, within the average project in Premiere. But once you've done that, and once you've verified that all your media is there, you could theoretically begin to edit. Of course, you still need a sequence. There isn't one down here yet, but I do talk to you about how to do that in a different lesson. But for the time being, you have now successfully created a project within Premiere Pro CC, and you're now ready to move on to the next lesson.